Okay. It's kind of odd how I started doing this. I taught school one year, about 10 years ago, down in New Orleans. I'd finished a career in banking. I never liked writing. I think I ended up in business because all you have to write are form business letters. Um, I even wasn't much of a reader. And I went down there and taught ninth grade English, which you just have to pass a test and be sort of literate to do that. And I got to the ninth grade textbook poetry section as I was teaching it to the kids. And I just thought the poems were marvelous. They were things like, we real cool, Gwendolyn Brooks, we real cool, we left school, we, drink gin, and William Wordsworth, about the butterfly or the buttercups or the daffodils along the lake. And I just remember thinking, these are just wonderful. And while I was down in New Orleans, then I took a piece of paper and I made the kids sort of write while we were doing this. And then I heard you're supposed to write along with them. So I made myself write some poems, which were of the most elementary type. And I got fascinated with the whole thing. I went home to my little apartment down there and I would try to write some more things, now having no idea what I was doing really. And then I came back to, I was in Michigan at the time, went back to Michigan, and I took a class. And then I just kept taking more classes. So it was just this sort of follow my nose into something I had no idea I had an interest in. And it was just sort of a marvelous exploration, and I had no thought I would ever go very far with it. I was just at that point in my life, I'd retired from years of work, of sort of doing what I felt like doing. And I'd never thought in my life I wanted to write a poem. So it was a surprise to me, and it's sort of still a surprise to me that I'm still writing. So that's how I started writing.
So the writing was a kind of right turn from a right turn. I mean, the teaching was the first right turn.
Yes.
away from a career in banking. Can you say anything about what brought you into that ninth grade classroom?
Yeah, I hadn't been, banking was all right, but I never felt like it was anything like a passion or a big thing I was particularly greatly interested in, fascinated with. I'd done it for 35 years. It's run its course with me long before, so I retired early. And at that point, I just set out not quite knowing at all what I wanted to do. And I just let myself do a variety of different things. I went down to an intentional community in Georgia called Koinonia, and I spent time there. Drove the pecan sweeper, and it was a farm, and stayed down there for a while. And there I met a man, he was a Quaker minister actually, who was also working on the farm. And he told me about a school in California. It's called, my mind is leaving me. It's in Carpinteria, California. And I'd read a book on mythology while I was down there. And so I thought, oh, this is really fascinating. And so this school taught mythology, among other things, mythology and archetypal psychology. So again, I just allowed myself to kind of follow my nose, and I went and got an MA in mythology and archetypal psychology. It was one of those remote learning things. You just flew out there once a month or so. And it was the first time I'd studied something that was just purely for the joy of studying something. And I found it fascinating. I really loved the work. And it just all surprised me that I enjoyed writing papers, which I had always avoided in college. And I enjoyed reading all of these classic stories and thinking about the myths, the great myths from all over the world. And it just gave me a whole different sense of the world and how people's minds think and their wishes and dreams for stories that are going to carry them through this life. And so that was just following along, and then I'd had this idea, okay, well, what did I want to do? Well, I wanted to teach, I wanted to be a park ranger. These are all sort of the old things I thought, well, maybe I would have liked to do those instead of being a banker. So then I became a park ranger one summer up on Isle Royal, a volunteer ranger doing nature interpretation. And then I applied for this, it was like an AmeriCorps thing, it was called the New Teacher Project down in New Orleans. And I applied for that, and I read 20 books that ninth graders read, and took the test, and I passed the test, and then I went down for summer training, and then I was thrown into a classroom this second year after the hurricane had swept the city clean, or made it a mess, really. And that was an experience, being in those classrooms with the kids down there, and the poor education they had, the poor facilities, and of course I wasn't a skilled teacher, so I wouldn't say I was particularly good at it. I learned a lot. I hope the kids learned something. And then I read poetry for the first time. So this is what I call sort of my tripping along phase of my life. And it was just a real joy to let myself do that. I'd never had that experience. I suppose kids today, after high school or college, sort of go on those exploring years. And I never did. I'd just gone straight to college and off to work. And so this was my sort of first really time to see where I wanted to go, and I didn't really know, and just give myself the permission to kind of be ridiculous in the choices I was making. And so that's how I ended up teaching in New Orleans.
Oh, you give me hope. I just met yesterday with a retirement investment counselor and had that question about what next flutter before me, and it sounds like it can be an adventure, this retirement business.
Definitely, yes. I would say just kind of give yourself permission to do that. I think it's a bound up life of duty and responsibility and the straight road in front of you that we're all supposed to be going down, or at least that's what I was raised with. And to be free of that. I read a book while I was down at Koinonia, and it was about, because I didn't know what to do, and there's these post-retirement books, and most of them are like kind of write your strategic plan for your life. You know, when people talk about these ridiculous bucket lists. But you can't write your strategic plan if you haven't opened doors to see sort of what's new. If you wrote a strategic plan at that point, it would have been just with the known things. I wouldn't have experienced poetry. So that wouldn't be on my list. But it was about following your body, which was another new concept for me. And that was your body knows. It's sort of this old saying, your body or your heart knows what your mind does not. So your body knows what your mind does not. And if you hold a thought and then you sort of feel in bodily that there's an excitement about it. Not like you jump up and down and yell yoo-hoo, but that you get a little sense of happiness that you know isn't intellectualized, it isn't thought through. And to use that as my guide in terms of what to do, since I didn't really know in a knowing way what to do. So that was another new experience.
My friend Mary Rose O'Reilly, who's probed many pieces of the world, claims to be led by nausea. At a certain point, she just can't stand to continue on the path she's been going. However interesting it was when she started.
Mm-hmm.
I have to ask, though, I mean, it is inconceivable to me that you were a bored and boring banker. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that the split was as absolute as you picture it, that you had a dutiful straight and narrow my life for 35 years and then blossomed. But maybe that's right. Is that the story you really want to tell?
Oh, it's the story I'm kind of left with. I kind of kick myself for all those years put in. I wore a suit and nylons and heels and clip-clop through the bank, yes. It was, you just get doing it. There were interesting things to learn, but it never really engaged me, but I never figured out how to stop or told myself I could stop. It's just like I look at myself like, boy, you're really just stupid. You didn't know how to say, I'm not going to do this anymore and do something else. At some point I explored teaching, actually, but at that point I had 3 kids. You know, you've got your life kind of moving along. The idea of I went down to one of the colleges, I would have had to go to school for 2 years. And again, this is just sort of, all right, I didn't have the gumption to do it. And I didn't. So it's like, oh gosh, that's like 2 whole years and I won't have any income. And, you know, I mean, I was married for 20 years, then you get divorced, then you got 3 kids, you're raising them, you're getting them through school, you're busy, busy, busy. And making a big change. Some people do that, and I really admire them. And then I look at myself and go, well, you were just kind of a little weakling then, and you just kept doing the, you know, earning the living and moving along that road. So,
does it feel like, you know, as you write and explore other things, does anything sort of burp up from that previous life that's useful or interesting or a kind of dividend?
I don't know. That's a really interesting, good question. I think I have written some poems specifically on kind of being lost through those years. I think life can't help but whatever you do teach you something if you're open to it. I think I was certainly learning about life through that time, you know, raising kids and being married and working bounces you around. You've got to get along with a lot of people. You've got to sort of figure out who you are a bit and how to manage yourself. There's friends you make that, you know, it's not only going to the bank every day that I'm doing for those 35 years. So you get through it, and I think maybe that's what helped me do all these other things. Maybe if I'd been in a place that was more comfortable, I wouldn't have had those other experiences. I would have stayed in a more comfortable zone and not had that need to go be a park ranger or do something else. And so I do like that I did those things. I'm not real pleased with myself that I put in 35 years doing something I wasn't more enchanted with. I look at myself as kind of having tripped along too many years.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it's the Eliot line, ridiculous the sad waste of time stretching before and after.
Very good.
Well, there's another piece of your initial statement that struck me because I work with some people who do kind of rest and recovery retreats and workshops and so forth for people who want to rethink where they're about. Nothing high end. I mean, we've recently thought maybe we'd try to make a little money on it, but for years it's been just, you know, we do it because we want to do it. But this koinonia experience seems to have been really valuable for you. It seems to have allowed a turn and to have opened up, you know, conversations that mattered. Can you say a little bit about what was special or important about that?
You're right. I think it really did. When I left banking, not knowing what I was going to do, my daughter had moved up here to do habitat through AmeriCorps. She'd finished college, and she did that for 2 years. And as part of her Habitat introduction, they gave him a history of Habitat. And part of the history is that it was founded at Koinonia, which is down in Americus, Georgia. And so when she heard about it, and I was wrestling with what to do next with my life, she's like, well, Mom, this might be a place you want to go. So I drove down there with a friend of mine just to check it out. And we both thought, all right, well, that might be all right. And so I applied and went down there. And at that point, I would say its central focus was it was dedicated to social justice and simple living. And in my mind, I was going down there, I said to friends, to sort of clear my mind of banking. And this was certainly an abrupt turn from banking. I wasn't on the golf course. I wasn't doing anything normal. I drove a pecan sweeper in the fall when the pecans came down, and you sit on this thing and the brush goes in the front and it stirs up all the red Georgia dirt and blows it all over your face. And all the meals are sort of common meals, and the housing is very, very simple. And I did some financial analysis for them, so I used some of my banking background a bit. But I also did just general work down there. And had time to relax and just have conversations. And yeah, that man that was down there, he and his wife had moved down there after retiring. And he was this Quaker minister and had been a psychotherapist as well. And so it was just the kind of place you could, after lunch, sit at a picnic table and just sort of chat a bit. And I remember he gave me this like little note, and he said, well, Barb, here's what you want to think about. And he wrote this down. What do you want to have? And underneath that he wrote, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? And at that point I thought to be meant, oh, you mean like be a teacher? But of course he meant a state of being. And I didn't even know that. I sort of got it eventually, but I hadn't had conversations like that with people. They don't say that in banking. So I suppose none of it is startling or fantastic or anything, but for me it was, wow, you can live this simply. You can not have to get engaged in this world of doing, of having. I was sort of in my mind ready to leave the having. I didn't feel I had great needs for have this, have that. I had never driven fancy cars or anything. But the doing was very much a mark of who I was. I was, athletic. I was, moving ahead in the banking world. I was doing, chasing my kids here and there and doing. So to hear about being was a new word for me to learn.
The last two people I've talked to seriously about mythology who got interested in it, I think got interested in it because they started meeting the gods. I mean, like coming around the corner and running into Thor. That kind of meeting the gods. What Simone Weil calls unmistakable contact, but oddly unmistakable contact with mythic figures. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, you're the third person who I've had this conversation with about a strong interest in mythology. What was that like for you personally? I mean, it's fascinating as an intellectual endeavor to find out how these pieces fit together and such. But how was it for you personally to study mythology?
Well, when I was down at Koinonia, I was reading a book. I can't even think of the author's name. The Care of the Soul or something. He used psychology to describe human behavior, and that's really the archetypal psychology piece of it, that the mythological figures are archetypes. So Zeus is an archetype of the corporate CEO. Zeus had lots of affairs. Shouldn't be surprised if CEO has lots of affairs. That's a real simplistic thing. You know, you have Persephone and Demeter. Demeter, the young girl who runs off and is taken down into the underworld, and her mother who goes crazy, pretty archetypal. The daughter's taken away. The mother turns the earth brown, doesn't let anything grow, but the deal is that the daughter, who was like at puberty, 16 or so, is drawn into the underworld, is archetypally what young girls need to do, is they go into the underworld. So when your daughter runs off with the bad boyfriend, you shouldn't be surprised. And archetypally, that's kind of a stage of life she needs to go through to become a woman. So she comes out of the underworld with the seeds of the pomegranate in her hand. She has tasted the underworld. And if she doesn't, she stays a young girl. So that's what this book is telling me. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And so that's kind of what attracted me, is these explanations of our human behavior that were long ago known, that your daughter was going to run off with the boy on the motorcycle. And so we shouldn't be surprised about this. So that was sort of my interest that took me out there. And I did enjoy reading those things, and we didn't study. I can't even tell you a whole lot about Greek mythology, because we had studies in creation myths of the Navajos and African creation myths and so on, the Mayan Indians creation myths. And then we studied some of the classics like Moby Dick, and as also a mythological kind of figure and an archetype. What it began to do for me was just sort of, one of the things I really liked was this idea that a myth great myths answer the questions of where do we come from? Is this all there is? What's expected of me while I'm here? What am I supposed to do? Those sorts of things. And I started to see, and of course at this school, I studied Islam and Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism, and as the great myths, because they answer those questions. And it just started to there's no intent at this school to put this into you, but it started to give me a sense of a universality when it comes to, I'm not a religious person, but it made me sort of answer the question in my head that these myths these questions have arisen for years, centuries, thousands of years, millennia, about where we come from, is there anything else, and all of that. And the idea came to me that it was nice to live in a story. I like that idea, rather than just a blank sort of thing. And so the story arises from those desires that people have, and that doesn't make the stories any less real to me. I mean, they're wonderful stories, and just like our families are stories in many ways. We compose them into a story, and we live in that story, and so that's sort of how I evolve my little notions of religion. They're really wonderful stories, and they're as real as can be. So that's what I think the study of mythology did. It just showed me these voices for thousands of years with the same urgency and desire to want to know these things. And it just made me feel like, wow, part of a universal collection of people and beings all wanting to know.
Mm-hmm. And was there anything particular that resonated with you as kind of a central myth?
Oh, I think the Demeter and Persephone story, I have two daughters, is a good one for me.
Yeah. The myth of having kids. I hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
Having to try to make sense of your relation to your grown kids or your adolescent kids,
Mm-hmm.
and to make some peace with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you see it as a universal sort of truth, it's not like something that's gone awry in your family when something happens. It's it's like, well, you should have expected it. It's pretty normal.
Yeah. And also the question of what to do when a real crisis comes up. As opposed to just the normal growing pains.
Mm-hmm.
How to handle those junctures. The move to poetry is one that I think about a lot, because I think I had something like the experience you had after teaching ninth grade, about when I was in ninth grade. And I wrote some things and had some favorites and began modeling. And then in college, I totally lost track of that impulse. And I was with people who were good at it, and as soon as it became a competitive game, it ceased to interest me. I didn't want to compete, and I didn't understand what it was like to be in it as a competitive thing. And now I'm wondering what it would be like to come back to it, and what exactly, it was an impulse that I don't have any motive for, understanding of as a part of a project. It just it happened. And so I'm curious, you've been writing for a while now, mm-hmm. what you've come to think about the point of this, or maybe the function of it, or what it evolves into if you do it for a while. Poetry.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I think for a lot of people, you start out kind of writing about family, exploring your mother and your father, all those interesting questions. I read a book by Gregory Orr that I think sort of talks about this more. I read it more recently, so I didn't know at the time why this was engaging me so much, but I think this is it. Poetry, as opposed to like journaling, where you just kind of scribble all over, all without restraint. I say, kind of throw up all over the page about your life or whatever is on your mind. But poetry requires taking control of what you're writing. You think about sounds, you think about rhythms, you think about how you're going to present this, how you're going to get into this, how you're going to get out of it. What really is the thing you're trying to get at here? You got to capture something. It's not just like write another 10 pages in your journal. And so as you search for that nugget of understanding, and then you search to sort of control it through rhythms and sounds and things like that, you kind of gain some mastery over these things that have happened to you in your life. And you gain some understanding. So rather than the thing sort of holding on to you, you gain some mastery of it as you deal with this, as you keep trying to write poems about it. Till after you've written enough, you sort of go, okay, I think I've dealt with my mother, or whatever, or my father. And then, so I did that for a while, and then there's so much to learn on all these different things, and so many books to read about how to compose a poem. So there's a lot, you know, I suppose you could relate it to learning anything, being a carpenter. There's a lot to learn, same in poetry. So you got to learn the tools, and then you have your subjects, and you start to get better control of these things and present them in better ways. And then I find myself moving on to other subjects. So now one of my interests is I've gotten real involved in climate change issues. And so I've been writing letters to the editor. And I just had my 5th letter to the editor published. I had 4 in Star Tribune and 1 in Pioneer Press just like a week ago. And I know I would never have written those if I hadn't been trying to write poetry. And I think through the poetry, I've definitely become a better writer. So I have a chance of having something published. And so that's been kind of fun. To not just sort of sit at home with my opinions about everything, but to actually be able now to sort of join in the voices that are out there about a community, a world issue. So that's been kind of nice. I'm still writing a lot. I've been writing a lot of sort of nature poems lately, more with that theme. So it just kind of, I also find myself just sort of never quite knowing what I'm going to write. I sit there. I've been writing since January. I made sort of a little vow I was going to write every day for the start of this year, and I've pretty much kept to that. And I never really have. I try not to intellectualize and think about what I'm going to write. I just kind of let it happen. And that's interesting, what I find I happen to write about that day. It's, you know, if I were to intellectualize it, stop and plan it, I might not write that. But then when I just sort of let it emerge, I'll read a few poems other people have written, just kind of get myself in the poetry mindset, and then I just start writing. And so it's just kind of a curious thing, too, to see where you are. So in terms of what it does for you, I guess that was your question. You know, I think it helps you gain control of some powerful things that we all have in our lives. And I think it opens up a world of communication that you can join in the world with. Helps you kind of see where you are at any given time. So those are things I like about it.
Yeah. Do you have a firm loyalty to poetry as your primary vehicle?
It's the only thing I've really tried, so I guess I write pretty short things, so I have a short attention span. It's so far, other than these few letters to the editor, which are also short little writings. It's enough. It's a lot to deal with, and I haven't had a desire. I did last year. I tried to write a children's book, just a very young person's. It had been a picture book, but I'm not the drawer, and I worked on that for a while, and I thought, I don't quite know what I'm doing, and I don't know I want to go study children's books, and really poetry is enough. So then I went back to poetry.
You've come to writing through a lot of classes, you say. Anything that stands out as particularly exciting in the teaching that has been valuable to you?
Well, it all comes kind of slowly. The first classes I took, there's a lot of emphasis on tone and mood and voice. I knew so little. I mean, I didn't even know what first and second person voices were. I mean, anyone who's a writer is, going to think whatever I say is pretty elementary. The mood, the separation of mood and tone, I think that was a really important thing. It took me a long time to understand that. I pick up classes. I had a class last summer here at the Loft with Thomas Smith. It was on sound in poetry. And that really, I mean, I am sure I'd heard that before and read it in different books, but it became bigger to me. It started to be more present as I was writing, and something I think I understood better. So it's just a constant thing. You hear it, then you can't, you don't know enough yet to how to incorporate it, and down the road you get another class that helps you see it better. So.
In this wonderful environment of Eat My Words books, every writer comes into this space is covered with this sort of cell wall of colorful books, because we're in the children's literature and selected short subjects room of this library, or this bookstore, which is also, I mean, you could mistake it for a library. It's got comfy chairs, and I expect they don't kick you out if you come in and read. I'm curious a little bit how reading and writing go together for you, and how your sort of life as a reader, is it run sort of parallel to or separate from, or a totally different planet from your life as a writer? Do they converge? Is one in the service of the other? I mean, how does that work for you?
I have to fess up to not being a big reader. I read, and I had to a lot of poetry to get hold of, and when I started out, I barely knew the names of any poets. So I just kind of, in terms of poetry reading, I kind of started in reading some of the bigger names that I knew about, and kept trying to understand sort of what they were doing. And I have now branched out and think I have quite a few under my belt, but nothing like people who've been at this since high school. And I regularly read poetry, so I've got like 4 new books at home right now that I'll read 3 or 4 poems, set them down, read another 3 or 4 poems. When I read, I really will think about the poem and how it's composed, not just what they have to say, but how they did it, sort of, how they put it together. So that's some of my exercise in writing and in reading. And then for pleasure, I read some nonfiction, I read fiction. I've been reading climate dystopia kind of things recently. So, I don't know. That's, I've always got a book I'm reading, and I am always reading some poetry. So it's just I'm not somebody who sits and reads like, a book a week, or 2 books or 3 books a week. So
how is it for you with the public side of writing? I mean, some people are writing sort of on spec. It's their business. They make a living producing a certain kind of thing, and others get real competitive about their numbers, how many journals they've published in, and they collect their acceptances and paper the wall with their turndowns, and there's a whole game there. How's that with you?
Well, it certainly is a big enterprise, and it's a different aspect than writing is. It's not a piece I enjoy that much. And at first I wasn't going to try to send anything out, and then I finally decided, all right, I would get into this game thing. And so I've made my way into it, and I do keep track of how many I've had published. It's now 16. And the reason I know that is because I've been told, like, okay, you're maybe getting to where you could get a book published if you had 20. So I send out, and then I read I can't think of his name. One of our poet laureates, national poet laureates, Ted Kooser, who wrote in his book that he'd had, I think he said, over 1,000 rejections. So as these rejections come in, they just roll off, and I laugh. I'm on my way to my first 1,000, you know. So I send out, I resist sending out, and then about every 6 months I'll sit down and send out to maybe 5 to 10 new publications, and watch the rejections roll in, then send out to another 5 or 10. I haven't gotten in that rhythm. Someone say, "Oh, well, every week you should send out." It's like, it kind of puts me in a bad mood to go through that, so I don't subject myself to it real often. But I do it. And it's fun when you get, better publications. It's like, wow, all right, got in this or that magazine.
Yeah. And is audience important to you? I mean, is the idea of writing for somebody an important part of your writing, or how you think about your writing?
I think for me it would be hard to, the audience can be, I'm in 2 poetry groups. One meets twice a month and one meets once a month. And the one that meets once a month, I've been meeting with for 6 years now. I took a beginning poetry class at the Loft, and that's where we formed out of that, 6 of us, and we've been together now for 6 years, once a month. And they become really good friends. And then I'm in a writing group that meets twice a month at the Loft, and we're friends. And I think the thing is not so much the critiquing aspect, but writing's very sort of lonely. You're all by yourself talking to the walls. And to be able to say it out loud, have other people hear it, makes what you do a little more real. So I guess it is important to me. It doesn't have to be a big audience, but just, I think being heard is some of what I like. I kind of wrestle with that, the legitimacy of me being heard, sort of the vanity of it and those sorts of things. And then it's just like, what the heck. I have some things to say, and people can read it or not. But being heard, I think, in some small way is something that helps me keep writing.
Are there specific ideas about kind of your family as audience, or the people who know you that way as audience? Do you feel any sort of special responsibility or special intimidation or anything there?
I don't let it really affect what I write. I can't say, my kids are good supporters and boosters of mine and say nice things. I have a very elderly mother, and she can be sort of, I don't know that she would respond very well to my poetry. I don't know if she would give it much favor, really, is how I have it in my mind, but I don't think she gets it. Sort of a why bother kind of thing is more what I would think of. And when I write about her or my father, I would think about which things to show her. It's not my intent to cause pain and harm doing these things, so and yet I want to be sort of truthful to myself and my emotions, and so she's not my audience. She doesn't ask to read my poems. I've shown her some, and my kids are great and good supporters, but other than that, I write about some of them. I write about some of my kids. I write about my grandchildren a little bit. And I've written about my father and my mother. But I'm careful who I show things to. I don't want to use this as some, I don't know, I don't write like sensational reveal life poetry. You know, I just, it's not what I want to do. So.
Yeah. I'm just conscious with my mother, who has written a lot, that, you know, she's 93, so, you know, she's not going to be with us forever. And that the stuff she leaves behind will be quite important to the grandchildren who sort of knew her, you know, who knew her, but knew her when they were pretty young only. That this will be their chance to make that connection. And so I'm kind of, I mean, it's on my mind, this matter of one's communication, not so much with one's kids or with one's parents, but with one's grandkids. Because it's so...
Well, I was interested in oral history for a while, and I did an oral history of my mother, and so I have that preserved. I've written, you know, fun poems because I feel, you know, poetry will be sort of my autobiography as well. So I don't mean to imply that you know, I have a relationship like a lot of people do. It has some, you know, good parts and some bad parts. My mother's been, you know, a real supporter of me for years, and has done a lot for me. And I have some fun poems of her playing golf, and I have another one of her, like you talk about people, you know, they're going to leave. And one is about helping my daughter make a Thanksgiving turkey, and how when we do something like that, there's all these old generations of women who are passing down the wisdom that somehow I haven't yet passed down to my daughter, how my mother did this and my grandmother did that. And so that history is important, and are linked to all these generations. So she comes in many good ways through the poems. So.
Do you find that, you know, I mean, this process of getting older and what happens, you know, Billy Collins has this famous poem about what goes out of your memory as you get older, and I mean, everybody knows about that. How do you see changes in your kind of your impulses and desires and the shape of your poetry that are kind of the product of being, say, 10 years older than you were when you were writing something else? I mean, how does that work as you keep writing and, you know, you change?
Well, of course, my history of writing doesn't go back like a lot of people's would, that you, at my age, that you'd ask that question of. If you go back to your 20s, I'm sure it changed a lot in the last 10 years. Well, it's changed a lot because I was just a beginning writer, and I'm a little bit more experienced. And my themes have changed. I feel I've gone through the whole family thing, and I feel very little inclination at this point to write about them. So I do see sort of where my interests are going, like more into nature, some exploration of sort of I don't want to say death, but sort of our state of being, our, you know, sort of a separation of myself, and I don't want to use words like soul, but just sort of seeing the body separate, as the body as temporal, and and my life is. And so some things like that I try to get at, more sort of meaning of it all, kind of things that I do think you kind of have to deal with you deal with the family first, and then you kind of can move on from there. And I think it's the family and what you learn there that also gives you a segue into how you think about life and where it goes. So sometimes it's just it'll be kind of in a more fun mood, and I'll write something that's a little more fun. I had a new patio put in. I wrote about sitting outside on my new front patio. I went camping last summer. I wrote about just camping and the shadows and the trees and the flowers. So different connections that I'm feeling come out now. Sort of curiosities about life and death and that kind of stuff.
Do you feel like you're settled into kind of your groove? I mean, during that period after you retired, there was all this exploration in massively different directions, from right turn and then another right turn and then another right turn. And I mean, is it inconceivable that, say, big game hunting or repairing squirrels or making furniture is going to be in the next 10 years?
Well, I just wrote a poem about wanting to have my hair dyed blue, like a bright, brilliant blue, sort of wanting a change. I do feel pretty content and comfortable at this point. I've got 2 grandchildren that just live a mile from me, and I'm writing and I'm doing climate action, and so I feel I have a pretty full life. I've got a lot of friends, but then I go, oh man, this can't just be it. It's got to go ride that horse across Montana or something. So yeah, I think I'll do something else sometime. Yeah.
The camera would love you with blue hair. I have a standing date with a local poet, Katrina Vandenberg. We've been going for years now, just checking in every year. And one thing she said in their last interview was that one of the big things she's done was to burn her journals. She'd gone through them very carefully, pulled out anything she thought was valuable, and burned the rest, which took a long time. Apparently it takes a long, the paper does not burn easily. It's that condensed. But part of what she was talking about was, this was the personal stuff. And she didn't kind of want that, and I mean, there were all kinds of things going on. I didn't get the whole story, but didn't want that stuff to be preserved as what people recall. She has a daughter now. Is that an impulse that makes any sense to you? I mean, I take it you're also a journaler as well as.
No, I'm not a journaler.
You're not at all. So you don't have a sort of place where just everything goes. Anything goes. You just write it all down. Is that something that has been an impulse for you, or something you've avoided, or?
I think my poems are honest about who I am. I think, if somebody read my body of poems at this point, they would get a feel for me and how I viewed life and what I've thought about things. No, I don't have an impulse to sort of, I don't know how to say it, like I was talking about journaling before, kind of just let every thought come out. It just, they don't really have standing merit to me, these fleeting, things we want to say, maybe. I think there's a deeper message than that I want to get to, than the superficial annoyances of life. So I really don't have a desire. It's kind of like Esquire magazine versus, something a little more polished than Esquire. And I don't, I just, it's not like I restrict myself. I just don't feel myself wanting to write that.
So your writing is an attempt to get beyond the kind of first impulses, first thoughts sort of thing. Not to hold on to those.
Right. And, to get at what am I really feeling? What am I really trying to say here? What is the sense of this? What, how to make meaning of this thing. And that's more what I want to get at. That's where my interest is. Not that, this happened to me or this happened to me, but how do you take that all in? And how did that affect you? How did that change you? What was the meaning of that in a relationship? What is the lingering feeling that comes out of that? But the he said, she said, this happened, that happened, doesn't have, those are just the superficial things, and then there's the depth underneath that. That's how it feels to me.
Mm-hmm. So, how, just the nuts and bolts question kind of for the end, how do you manage to make writing a part of your life? You're talking about, since January you've resolved to write every day, but how does writing fit in with all the other stuff you do?
Yeah, well, this is kind of new, and I was letting it kind of slide for a while, and I was thinking, you get to am I not going to write poetry anymore? Is this sort of a passing phase that now I'm moving into horseback riding or whatever the next thing is? But I don't know. I've liked it. It's been a good sort of I don't want to say an anchor because it hasn't held me down, but it's provided meaning in my life, and it's also given me friends and an interesting opening to a lot of things. So it's like, no, it's not a little frivolous thing I want to just throw away. So how does it fit in? Well, I'm retired. I have time to do it, and it's just, if I don't do that, I spend more time reading the newspaper and or reading. That could be walking more. I could be doing other things. I would think right now there's not a sense of I want to do something else, so poetry is holding me back. I like writing poetry, so it's incorporated in my life, in something I am enjoying pretty much.
Regular time each day?
Well, this year I have done that, and that's been kind of nice. I wrote this morning, I wrote yesterday. I don't commit to a finished poem. I write sort of a poem, thoughts on a poem, and then maybe a week later I'll go back and look at 4 or 5 of these and go, oh, nothing here, nothing here. Now, oh, that looks like it's got some things I want to work on. And I'll go back and work on it and see if it develops more. So it's just like reading the paper in the morning. It's just something you do. You turn your mind to it. As I say, I read poetry first. I kind of get myself in a different state of mind where I'm kind of quiet and thoughtful, and then let the muse kind of comes and sits on your shoulder and writes something. It's quite amazing, when you didn't even know that was on your mind. So it's fun.
Thank you.